On the night of February 27, 2026, an Omani diplomat was carrying a message from Iran to Washington saying Iran was ready to bring its uranium stockpile down to zero, and a deal was still possible. A few hours later, the bombs fell anyway. Before sunrise on February 28th, missiles began hitting Tehran, and the supreme leader of Iran, who had ruled the country for 37 years, was killed at his own desk, along with his daughter, his grandchild, and dozens of senior military commanders who died within minutes of each other across multiple cities. Iran fired back with over 500 ballistic missiles and nearly 2,000 drones. The Strait of Hormuz, which carries nearly 20% of the world's oil every single day, was shut down. At least 3 Americans were killed, and more than 200 people died across Iran in the first hours. Both sides were still talking, and Iran had just sent a signal it wanted a deal. So, why did the bombs still fall? That is exactly what this video is going to show you. That question has one answer, and it goes back much further than February 2026. Both sides had been moving toward this moment for years. They sat in separate rooms, passing messages through a third country for nearly a year. They held 6 rounds of talks. They had people working in the middle to help both sides communicate. They had deadlines. They had every reason to make a deal, and they did not. What you are about to read is the story of how both sides walked, step by step, into a war neither could fully stop, and how the world is now paying the price for decisions made in Washington, Tel Aviv, and Tehran. To understand where this began, you have to go back to 1979. Iran went through a revolution. The US-backed government fell. Iranian students seized the US embassy in Tehran and held 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. From that moment, the relationship between the United States and Iran broke completely, and it stayed that way for nearly 5 decades. The issue that kept that relationship in a permanent state of tension was Iran's nuclear program. For years, the international community accused Iran of secretly trying to build a nuclear weapon. Iran denied it, but the evidence kept growing. In 2015, Iran signed an agreement called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with the US, UK, France, Germany, Russia, and China. Iran agreed to limit its nuclear activities in exchange for the removal of economic sanctions. Then, in 2018, US President Donald Trump pulled out of that agreement. He said it was too weak. From that point, Iran began rebuilding its nuclear program faster than ever before. By early 2025, what Iran had built was no longer just a concern on paper. It was a real and growing danger. The key people in this story are Donald Trump, who set the terms and the deadlines; Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, who led the American side of the talks; Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who insisted on indirect negotiations; Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, who had the final say over every nuclear decision Iran made; and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who was against the talks from day one and pushed for military action throughout. To understand why all of these people failed to stop a war, you first need to understand exactly how far Iran's nuclear program had gone. When Iran signed the 2015 nuclear agreement, it agreed to limit uranium enrichment to 3.67% purity. That level is suitable for civilian power generation. Iran also agreed to hold no more than 202 kilograms of enriched uranium in total. After Trump pulled the United States out of that agreement in 2018, Iran removed those limits one by one. By early 2025, Iran's total enriched uranium stockpile had grown to more than 40 times the amount the 2015 agreement allowed. The number that concerned people the most was the enrichment level itself. Weapons-grade uranium needs enrichment to 90% purity. Civilian nuclear power uses 3.67%. By May 2025, Iran was enriching uranium to 60% purity. That level has no real civilian use. No other country without a nuclear weapon was doing this anywhere on Earth. The International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the United Nations nuclear watchdog, said so directly and called it a matter of serious concern. By May 31, 2025, the IAEA reported that Iran had built up 408.6 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%, a rise of nearly 50% since February of the same year. According to analysis by the Institute for Science and International Security, that stockpile, if further enriched to weapons grade at the Fordo facility, could produce material for 9 nuclear weapons. The first 25 kilograms needed for one weapon could be produced in as little as 2 to 3 days. Nuclear experts calculated Iran's breakout time, meaning the time needed to produce enough material for a bomb, as nearly zero. In mid-2024, the U.S. intelligence community removed its long-held position that Iran was not pursuing key nuclear weapons development activities. This was a significant shift in how Washington understood the situation. Iran kept saying throughout this period that its nuclear program was for peaceful civilian use only. But what Iran was actually doing did not match those words. Iran had been blocking IAEA inspectors, refusing cameras at key facilities, and cutting off access for experienced international inspectors. The IAEA said it could no longer fully confirm what Iran was doing with its nuclear material. Iran had also set up over 20,000 centrifuges across its enrichment sites at Natanz and Fordo. Many of these were newer and more powerful models. The rate at which Iran was producing 60% enriched uranium had jumped sharply in late 2024 after Iran changed how it was feeding certain centrifuge systems, pushing output much higher. This was the situation when talks began in April 2025. Both sides walked into those talks knowing a deal was going to be very hard to reach. But just how hard becomes clear when you look at what actually happened inside each round of those talks. On April 7, 2025, Trump announced that the U.S. and Iran would hold nuclear talks in Oman. Iran immediately said they would be indirect, meaning the two sides would not sit in the same room. The first round took place on April 12th in Oman. It ended with only a promise to hold more meetings. A second round was held in Rome on April 19th. A third round went back to Oman on April 26th. And for the first time, expert-level technical discussions were included. From the outside, this looked like things were moving forward, but neither side had moved its position even slightly. Iran came to the talks with one clear demand. Discussions would only cover its civilian nuclear program. It would not allow its ballistic missile program, its support for armed groups across the region, or its human rights record to be part of any agreement. Iran basically wanted something close to the 2015 deal to come back. The United States wanted the opposite. Washington wanted any new agreement to cover Iran's missile program, its armed groups in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, and a full stop to uranium enrichment. These were not small differences. These were two sides who could not even agree on what the talks were supposed to be about. And that gap never closed across any of the 6 rounds. The 5th round of talks was held on May 23rd in Rome. It ended with no result. Both sides said they would keep talking, but nothing had moved forward in any real way. Behind the scenes, Israel was working hard to stop the talks from going anywhere. In the weeks before the 5th round, the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu got worse. Israel saw the U.S. decision to talk with Iran as a direct threat to its own safety and pushed against the negotiations at every step. At the same time, Iran was not sitting still. It was strengthening its air defense systems, putting more money into its military, and bringing in Chinese-made solid fuel parts for its ballistic missiles. Both sides were preparing for a possible war while sitting at the negotiating table. After the 3rd round of talks, Trump became openly unhappy. The silence coming from Washington after that round made it clear that patience had run out. 6 rounds, no deal, no agreement even on how a deal should look. And the next move did not come from any negotiating table. It came from the skies over Iran. On June 13, 2025, Israel launched a full military attack on Iran. Israel hit nuclear and military sites across Iran. Among the first targets was Natanz, Iran's main uranium enrichment site. Israel also killed more than a dozen of Iran's top nuclear scientists and hit ballistic missile launch sites. Netanyahu said the goal was to wipe out Iran's nuclear and missile program completely. But there was a clear military problem with that goal. Israel does not have weapons strong enough to destroy Iran's deeply buried nuclear facilities on its own. Fordo is built inside a mountain. Israel's largest bombs cannot go that deep underground. What Israel could do was kill scientists, damage surface buildings, and put the United States in a position where it felt it had to step in and finish the job using weapons that only Washington has. That is exactly what happened next. On June 22, 2025, the United States joined the fighting directly, striking 3 Iranian nuclear sites: Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. Iran fired back the next day by launching ballistic missiles at the U.S. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. Trump announced a ceasefire on June 24th. Trump told the public the U.S. had wiped out Iran's nuclear program. That was not what the evidence showed. A later U.S. government review described the strikes as having significantly reduced Iran's nuclear program. The same review found that only 1 of the 3 targeted sites had been fully destroyed. The 6th round of nuclear talks that had been planned for June 15th in Oman was canceled. Iran walked away from all contact with the U.S. side. A ceasefire was announced, but it did not fix anything. It only delayed what was coming next. The ceasefire of June 24, 2025 stopped the immediate back and forth of strikes, but it fixed nothing on the ground. Iran's government was still standing. Its nuclear knowledge was still there. And behind closed doors, Iran's leadership had reached one very clear conclusion about what had just happened to them. Even after the June 2025 strikes, Iran still had the ability to produce enough nuclear material for a bomb within weeks to several months. Under the original 2015 agreement, that window had been more than a year. The strikes had pushed things back somewhat, but had not stopped the program. Inside Iran, things were getting worse every week. Years of U.S. and European sanctions had badly damaged the economy. In January 2026, Iranian security forces killed thousands of protesters during the biggest wave of public anger since the 1979 revolution. The government was under heavy pressure from its own people. Its armed groups across the region were in poor condition. Hamas had been badly weakened in Gaza. Hezbollah had lost key people and weapons. The Houthi movement in Yemen was under constant U.S. military pressure. On August 28, 2025, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom formally started the process to bring back all previous UN Security Council sanctions on Iran. Those sanctions fully returned on September 28, 2025. Iran's position in the world had not been this weak in many years, and yet the government did not fall. Instead, it reached a very simple conclusion. The only reason Iran had been attacked was that it did not yet have a nuclear weapon. Governments that gave up their weapons programs got removed from power. Governments with nuclear weapons were left alone. Iran's leaders had watched that happen in other countries for years. Now they were on the receiving end of it. That conclusion is what drove Iran into the final round of talks, not with any real hope of a deal, but as a way to buy time while deciding what to do next. By January 2026, the United States was putting together the biggest military force in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. On January 23rd, Trump announced that a U.S. military fleet was heading toward the region, including the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln and several guided missile destroyers. On February 13th, Trump sent the USS Gerald R. Ford and its supporting warships to join them. On February 6, 2026, Iran and the United States held indirect nuclear talks in Muscat, the capital of Oman. Iran's representatives said any movement forward required them to go back and consult with leadership in Tehran first. U.S. and European officials confirmed that Washington had given Iran 3 core demands. One of them was a permanent and complete end to all uranium enrichment on Iranian soil. That one demand made a deal nearly impossible for Iran. Uranium enrichment is written into Iranian law as a national right. Iran's leaders had said many times in public that they would never give it up permanently. Agreeing to permanently stop enrichment meant giving up the only path Iran had left to protect itself. After what had already happened in June 2025, no Iranian government could say yes to that and expect to stay in power. Iran came to the February talks willing to accept limits on enrichment, the way it had under the 2015 agreement. It would allow international monitoring, but it would not permanently stop enrichment. It would not talk about its missiles. It would not talk about its armed groups across the region. The two sides were just as far apart as they had been in April 2025. 10 months of talks had not moved either government even one step. On February 26, 2026, The last round of indirect talks in Geneva ended with nothing agreed. That lack of progress was enough for Trump to give the order for what came next. Oman's foreign minister, the person who had been carrying messages between both sides for months, said afterward that he was deeply troubled that active and serious negotiations had been cut short again. The night before the strikes, that same person reported that Iran had sent a signal that it might be willing to bring its enriched uranium stockpile down to zero. Whether that offer was real or whether it came too late is still being argued. What nobody is arguing about is what happened in the hours that followed. Before sunrise on February 28, 2026, the first missiles hit Tehran. The joint U.S.-Israeli attack was called Epic Fury by the Pentagon and Roaring Lion by Israel. U.S. forces hit hundreds of targets inside Iran using Tomahawk missiles launched from Navy ships in the region, as well as strikes from multiple types of fighter jets. The strikes hit Tehran, Isfahan, Qom, Karaj, and Kerman. Targets included nuclear facilities, military command buildings, and senior leadership compounds. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed at his office. His daughter, his son-in-law, his grandchild, and other family members were also killed in the strike on his compound. Civilians were also killed, with damage reported at schools, hospitals, the Grand Bazaar in Tehran, and the Golestan Palace. The Iranian Red Crescent reported that more than 200 people were killed across Iran in the first hours of the attack. Iran fired back within hours. By March 5th, Iran had launched over 500 ballistic and naval missiles and nearly 2,000 drones. Around 40% were aimed at Israel. Around 60% went toward U.S. military bases across the region. Missiles hit Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the UAE. British military facilities in Bahrain, Qatar, and the RAF base at Akrotiri in Cyprus were also struck. Iran shut down the Strait of Hormuz, cutting off a major global oil route. Hezbollah in Lebanon started attacking northern Israel again. At least 3 American service members were killed in Iran's strikes. Trump did not go to Congress before ordering the attack. War powers resolutions were introduced in both the House and Senate. They failed. The UN Secretary General spoke out against the strikes. Russia warned the United States that what it was doing was making the whole region more dangerous. Inside Iran, people reacted in very different ways. Some went into the streets to celebrate Khamenei's death, hoping the government would fall. Security forces shot at them. Others held rallies in support of the government and mourned. An interim leadership council was set up on March 1st to run Iran until a new supreme leader could be chosen. But the bigger question, the one this whole story had been building toward, was now sitting right in front of the world. Did any of this actually work? The stated goal was to destroy Iran's nuclear program and bring down the government. On both counts, the results tell a very different story from what Washington said publicly. The White House's own internal document from November 2025 said the June 2025 strikes had significantly reduced Iran's nuclear program, not ended it, reduced it. The U.S. Defense Department estimated that the June 2025 strikes pushed Iran's nuclear program back by around 2 years. Iran had been building this program for decades. 2 years is not the end of anything. It is a delay. Iran's nuclear knowledge cannot be taken away with bombs. The understanding of how to enrich uranium at high levels, how to run advanced centrifuges, and how to build the equipment needed cannot be removed by airstrikes. Even if every building is destroyed, the people who built them are still there. After the February 2026 strikes, the IAEA was again unable to get into Iran's nuclear sites. Nobody outside Iran could independently check what was left, what had been hidden underground, or what would be rebuilt. Iran had already said before, June 2025, that it had moved nuclear material to locations that were not known to the outside world. Several independent analysts said clearly that if the Iranian government comes through this conflict still in power, it will almost certainly move faster toward building a nuclear weapon. The reason is simple. The strikes proved that not having a nuclear weapon is not enough protection. Iran has now seen twice what happens when it does not have one. And that lesson is the most important outcome of this entire war. Because the weapon this war was supposed to prevent may now be the one thing Iran feels it cannot survive without. Now you understand why this war is not really just about nuclear sites or missile ranges. It is about who gets to decide what the Middle East looks like for the next 30 years, and that question does not have an answer yet. 6 rounds of nuclear talks took place between April 2025 and February 2026. Both sides came with positions they would not change. The U.S. wanted Iran to permanently give up enrichment. Iran said no. Iran wanted talks to stay limited to its civilian nuclear program. The U.S. said no. The Omani diplomat who spent months carrying messages between both governments said talks were still going the night the bombs fell. More than 200 people died in Iran in the opening hours of February 28th. At least 3 Americans were killed. Missiles landed in 9 countries. A leader who had run Iran for 37 years was killed at his desk. A nuclear watchdog lost access to the sites it was supposed to be watching. And the world is now waiting to find out whether Iran's next government will choose to talk or decide. It has no choice but to build the very weapon this war was supposed to prevent. The facts are on the record. The choices were made by real people, and those choices will be studied and questioned for a very long time. If this gave you a clearer picture of what actually happened, share it with someone who needs to understand what is at stake, and follow this channel as this situation keeps developing.